like to introduce Vicki Branson. She was, I think, was considered the chairman of the committee of OHS to create the muffins in 1981. Is that a good description, or something like that? She'll explain all that. So, welcome Vicki back.
First of all, I have to thank you guys for inviting me, and let me just tell you, it's kind of a weird experience. I studied history, I'm not history. So to be, talking about myself and what I did as history is kind of a strange thing for me. But let me kind of explain who I was at that time, because it really helped define who the Muffins started out to be. I started the village in 1979. I started straight out of college. I graduated with an art history degree, not even American history. I was an art historian, and I started working in the village. And my job had a glorified name of, I was a floater. My job was to, with 6 other women, we were all women at that point, was to cover everybody's lunch and their breaks. And so we kind of learned a little bit about everything. I knew how to do a little bit of harness shop work, I knew the blacksmith shop, gun shop, all those. And I could be able to interpret all that. My other glorified position that kind of said for me is I was going to be the color person. And what does that mean? It meant I was the person they sent out to have their photo taken. Every time one of the craftsmen, they really hated having their pictures taken after a while, I got stuck in to do the posed shot. So I have this vision of myself in way too many houses and 35mm film reels of people's vacations, of visiting us. And especially we had a lot of Japanese visitors at that time. I know I'm over in a lot of movies, films of people's visits there. So, and there's a picture of me in my early days in my costume. I did everything from, I started as a floater, and then I moved up to, I was the first school marm, full-time school marm at the schoolhouse. I ran the general store for a while, and started the Muffins. So those are my village years. I was only at the village until 1983, and then after that I became site manager over at Pickla, and did that for 8 years. I worked at the Historical Society and did various jobs. I was a volunteer coordinator at one point, membership manager, marketing manager, also was in charge of the historic sites for the eastern part of the state of Ohio. So large variety of jobs through there. And the running joke is I was only not in security in the business office, and neither one would they trust me in. So, so my background, I was a 24-year-old when the Muffins started. So you were formed by somebody who didn't have a whole lot of background in history, and I had 3 months at the most to get you started. Because what had happened is in 1979, when I worked at the village, all winter, we had a winter season at that point. We stayed open all year round. But in 1981, as a historical society is today, we were always kind of like the foreshadowing of money problems to come. We started getting cutbacks. And we were told that a bunch of us who were the floaters, all the floaters would be laid off for the winter months. And I'm living by myself. I'm a 22-year-old at that point, 23-year-old, and I am worried about how I'm going to get through those next couple of months. So I don't even have the sense of thinking about what I'm doing. I go up to the senior staff chief in charge of the education division, Amos Loveday, and I said, if you keep me on, I could do all kinds of things for you. I could research this, and I could start this, and da-da-da-da. And I think he just thought somebody had a lot of guts, and he kept me on. And so I got to stay on and do research projects with one other woman And that was only if we didn't have, if you had a home-based building, like if you had a building, like if you were the craftsman in the tin shop or something, you stayed in the winter and you would do all those crafts. Joyce DeLeo and I were given research projects. And so 40 hours a week was what we were working, and we would be given certain research projects. You guys, the muffins was not my only research project of 1981. I actually had to start a newspaper as well with Joyce. So we researched a newspaper. So you can imagine I really didn't have a whole lot of time. And also I was the fill-in for anybody who, if they needed a volunteer tour guide, or they needed a tour guide on the exhibit floor, I had to learn how to do that really quick. And so research time with the muffins was pretty quick. And how did we come up with the idea? I was not the idea person. The idea person was Amos Loveday. He was the, Dr. Loveday was in charge of the education division. And he had just taken a trip in November to Cooperstown. And while he was there, he saw all this background of what, how Ohio affected the baseball's history. And especially right at that time was the 100th anniversary of professional baseball was going to be in 1981, which was a big thing. And if you guys, some of you might remember it, teams wore old-fashioned uniforms, there were all kinds of celebrations, and Amos thought, well, wouldn't this be perfect if we started our own team? The other reason it was nice to have team, some kind of sport is the village was all kind of based on what was, so people working, what their work habits were, not as much their social habits or what their recreational habits were, and there was a lot of that. And I think I got assigned the project by Amos because I was, again, the glorified color person. They would send me out in 1979, the winter of 1979-80, when the village was still open. I got to go ice skating on what at that time was a duck pond. Now picture wearing a hoop skirt, long dress, cape with no arms. So you're trying to hold this cape shut so you don't have the balance of your arms. And I'm the ice skating color person. While the guys had fun throwing rotten duck eggs at me. So I think Amos said, oh, she's stubborn enough, she'll do this. So he said, he came back from Cooperstown with a print of the Cooperstown, one of their baseball manuals that they had, and he said, this is all I have to give you, you have to start from scratch. So I'm going to pass it. This is the original muffin bylaws and rules. This is all we had to work off of, and we adopted this and rewrote it and used as much of the original as we could, and then put our stuff in. And it was printed in the print shop, so this is what we started with.
What did you say it was based on?
In Cooperstown, he found one original bylaws and rules of one of the teams. And so we were doing this, and so that's how I had. But when I mentioned the newspaper, the reason, and I'm going to pass it around, the newspaper research project really was a big plus for him, because I got to look at probably, I want to say 200 to 300 original newspapers from around the state of Ohio. They were digitizing them and microfilming them at that point. And so all the old ones were going to be disposed of. So they just handed these big bound sections of newspapers over to Joyce and I, and we would research everything to do the newspaper. Well, while we were doing that, I found a lot of things listed about different teams and their games and things that they were having. And I found little odds and ends. I also wrote Cooperstown to get every bit of information I could from them, and started researching all the other things that I could find at that point that were out. Now, keep in mind this time period, you know, there's still a lot of they're going with the idea that Abner Doubleday founded baseball. There's no real set research on the history of baseball at that point even. So a lot of it's a whole new area of research. So there wasn't much to find. So finding the rule book was probably the biggest thing. And the other thing I studied, because it was out on the exhibit floor all the time, was a Courier Knives print of the national pastime, baseball. And I would just spend a couple hours a day just kind of looking at that and trying to figure out, you know, what they were doing, watching all the audience, seeing all the players, and looking at the uniforms. So, I probably spent about, I want to say, 10 to 20 hours a week doing the research for the baseball team. And I had maybe 2.5 months to get something written, put together, and then I had to implement. Because by June 1, Amos wanted this playing. So that's a really big challenge, because that means you've got uniforms, I gotta find somebody, I've got to train guys to play, I've got to find somebody to play against, and all of this. So there wasn't a whole lot of things. So what I did find is I found a lot of slang. And if you look at the newspaper, there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek things in the newspaper. I have a pretty dry sense of humor, and that's partly when I get into telling you about why you're named the Muffins. That comes to play with it. You know, we were doing a lot of kind of a humor, and the slang part really stuck with me. You know, there was a lot of things that you could get the idea of the rules and understand the rules a little bit more when you see the slang, like leg it, and what they called all the players and things. Your uniforms came from the Courier Knives print. Very much, you know, that's how we were doing it. We had a full-time wardrobe person at the village at that time, Carolyn Williams. And Carolyn and I sat there and looked at the prints. And then that was with plus about the 100-year anniversary of the Muffins, or of professional baseball, sorry. That was the plus of having that anniversary, is all these teams were wearing these historic reproduction outfits. So the hats, the red hat, which up here is a couple of pictures of the original players team, we could buy the red hat. We didn't have to make the red hat. So it was like, what a plus. We just had to find the money to get together to do that. The pants and the shirts, I was telling a gentleman earlier this morning, there was actually an Amish kind of catalog where we could buy shirts and we could buy pants. They were the flat pants with the buttons, the button flat pants. We could buy those in bulk, and we decided we were going to go with the scarlet and gray. We saw a lot of red, and the red, I'll tell you why you ended up with red. But then, you know, of course, you know, kind of like that scarlet and gray Ohio State thing. We're in Columbus. I'm an Ohio State alumni. You're scarlet and gray.
All right, yay.
So that's how you got the shirts. On the Courier Knives, you know, there is a placket. We saw a lot of pictures of teams. I would look at pictures of teams, and I would see the insignias of the team's name. You know, they always had the cursive letter, or the Old English Gothic version of the letter done on there, and Carolyn said she could recreate that, so we decided that. The other original piece I have is this is my original muffin bell. This is how tiny I was. The harness maker was one of my players. And I home based in the harness shop, which meant as a floater, I got to pick one shop that I would stay in when I had covered everybody's lunches and breaks. And I got to stay there, and I got to learn the craft. So I made my own belt. So that's an original muffin belt, though. So we had the muffin belt, which that took so much time. You should have watched us trying to get into our belts. It was like players all standing in a conga line trying to, since, you know, it was like, okay, do we put it on the front and switch it around the back? And if we did, our shirts were all clumped up, and it just didn't make sense. And yes, I had a full uniform. At that point, the guy said, you have to do this too if we do. So I was probably one of the only women that ever had a muffin uniform.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the red cravats, again, were part of the uniform. I will admit our shoes did not pass muster. I had a terrible time with my guys with the shoes. A lot of them wore whatever shoes they were wearing in the village, and so I had a lot of accidents and injuries. Or if I had anybody who volunteered, they wore tennis shoes. So we didn't look really historically correct from the ankle down, but we were close. So that's what the uniforms were, and that's how we came up with that. Now, the name. Let me be real honest. We knew there was monetary problems at the Historical Society, and the big push at that time was all the places we could find funding. And we were looking for a lot of donations. So coming into this whole process, Amos kept telling me, you've got to find a sponsor. So I'm not only writing research, I'm trying to figure out who I'm going to have sponsored. I'm from Findlay, Ohio, that home of Marathon Oil Company. So I knew growing up, the Marathon had always sponsored the Detroit Tigers and the Cincinnati Reds in different projects. So you became the Muffins because that's a big red M, like the Marathon insignia. And not only that, I loved using the term muffin because that described who my players were. If you don't know, when you look at the original picture of the Muffins, and there's one in this handbook, and I think, Jim, did you put it in there? You didn't get it in. Okay. That's the only thing I couldn't find to bring today. I just recently moved to Marion, so I can't find everything. But this is a picture of the original Muffins, and I'll pass it around. Who we were. We were historians, including the director of the Historical Society played for the Muffins, Gary Ness. And I will tell you, he was my best player, and that was not being a brown nose. And he brought his three boys. Two of them were my bat boys, because he had to keep, his wife made him take the boys every time. So the two boys became the bat boys, and they were kind of stuck with me. But then we had the harness maker, the blacksmith, the gunsmith, the cabinet maker, Masonic Lodge guy, all these shops, which that was the other joy. They either had to find a volunteer to fill in their place, or there was a lot of shops closing. So we were trying to also get volunteers to man shops. So these guys were my original Muffins, and there was only one guy who had ever played baseball in high school on the team. So know that that was a huge challenge. So Muffins accurately described who my team were. And I really never thought it's going to go so far that you guys would be stuck with this name for the rest of your life. But I also thought it was a great way to start interpretation, because you had to explain, why am I called a muffin? You know, and it went back to slang. And when I did interpretation, people love to connect with what they know today. So, you know, you could say, well, remember, you know, you call different things. You have slang used today. They had slang back then, and muffins were people who muffed the catch and couldn't catch the ball. And that described the guys. The first team also, we actually had two teams I kind of had to start. we had the historical center had a team, and so did the village. And the center's team quickly dissolved. It was pretty much just set up so we would have somebody to play against the first day. And so the guys quickly decided they wanted to become Muffins and not have their own team. So we only played 2 games ever with the center team. And the first year we played probably 6 games at the most. And the Muffins won everyone because nobody else understood the rules.
Right.
And that was how you won most of the games to start out with.
That's right.
Because how we found other teams was just my sheer guts of writing people. I thought, okay, who's around us and who is historic? You know, who else was doing history stuff around us? So I had the guts to write the State Highway Patrol training barracks. We played them, which was very funny because how we won that one, I don't know. We played the Columbus Clippers. Ken Snocky was there at that time, and he came out and he actually played with the Clippers. And it was pretty funny watching that. And we played Slate Run Farm was another one. So it was an interesting group, you know, and there were several games of just other softball teams coming in. So we were playing men and women at that time. It was whoever we could get to play against us was the challenge. When you do that too, the other team, when I said we were just trying to play history, I wrote the Tecumseh staff, and we played Tecumseh. And it was the funniest game in the world to watch because, first of all, I had every woman who she could have cared less about baseball, but there was a good-looking Tecumseh that year, and he was playing in a loincloth. And Simon Kenton was pretty popular too. He had long blonde hair at that point, so big tall guy. So we had a lot of women fans in the first couple years of the Muffins. But we played Tecumseh. So and then I think one of the questions I was asked to address is where did we go and stuff. We did make road trips the second year. The second year we started playing at other OHS sites. We played at National Road, and we played at Zor. We played at Zor for the Harvest Festival. That's a game I will tell you was pretty funny because not knowing, I mean, I would talk to the site manager and I'd say, okay, where we're playing. She goes, well, you're playing next to the levee. I'm like, okay, I've never seen a levee. And then she said, there might be somewhat of a challenge. I'm like, okay, yeah. My guys got there and they were just like, I'm running up that hill. Third base was at the edge of the levee. And I don't know if it still is, but that's where it was. And I had one guy say, I am not a goat. The only way I got the team there is I had, got them out on the field is it was a beer festival also. So I said you have 2 hours before we get back in the car and I take you back. And I felt like the mother driving because every time I drove the guys, it was like, are we there yet? Can we stop at the bathroom? I should tell you about the field we had here. The Muffin Meadow was originally, it started the first year. It was laid out by the historians. It took us 2 weeks to figure out how to lay out a baseball diamond. There was a lot of trying to figure out the angles and all that. Mostly what would happen if we hit the ball over the fence and how could we get to the ball if it was on the other side of the fence was a big worry because they didn't always open the gates. So a lot of times it was a home run if it went over that fence, and I don't know if it is today. So we had the Muffin Meadow right away. We did use originally the first 2 years regular baseball bases. We had a gentleman who came in who was a former umpire for the city of Columbus baseball league teams playing. Ken Sparks played for us, and he brought the bases. It was like whatever donations we could get. We made our own equipment besides that, though, except for the balls. The balls, we couldn't get anybody to make balls for us. We would ask various people to do it, and nobody was really interested in doing that for us. And so what we used were the soft cotton rag ball, and I don't know if they're the same. I don't know what they use in batting cages now, but what it was is what you use when you're doing batting cage balls. That's what we used, was a rag ball that was kind of soft, but it had a very weird bounce to it. Our guys really had a tough time with that bounce, and that was the reason the other teams really had a terrible time with the bounce, especially when we told them they couldn't use their gloves. They would be out there just bouncing balls, trying to practice bouncing balls. We made our own bats. We had a shop here at the center, and the guys, we had a couple players from the team that were in the shop, and they made our bats. And we had a variety of bats because we couldn't find any exact bats, you know, enough descriptions the first year. So we had a range that looked like, you know, everything you saw written was, they looked like axe handles or wagon spokes. Well, that's a pretty wide variety there. So we had all of those, just so our players could pick a choice and choose which they wanted to use. So that's kind of what the equipment looked like. So we've talked about that. After probably, and I told you, you know, my first players were pretty much all historians. And if you look at the first team, there's pretty much maybe a predominant amount of them, I'd say 80% of them were paid employees on that first team. But we did have a few volunteers. And how we started getting volunteer muffins, and how we started getting other teams to play, is we played the Mudsills that first year. And does anybody know who the Mudsills are? They're a Civil War reenactment group, and I don't know if they're still around, but they were probably at one time considered the most historically accurate one. And they were around in the 19th, with the bicentennial of the U.S. They were kind of founded right around there, and they were a large group, and the Mudsills played the Muffins, and that was probably our best historic game we played that first year. And surprisingly enough, I got some of those guys that were so excited off of that they decided to become Muffins. So I started getting volunteers, and then I started getting people who, just because they saw it, they would say, oh, can I play too? And so we started expanding our team, and which made it better because closing the shops wasn't a really good thing. Visitors still wanted to see the shops, so the shopkeepers pretty much after the second, third year, we had maybe one or two that would play, but a lot of them were beginning to become the regular volunteers. Our umpires, though, were always Amos Loveday. He loved the idea of the Muffins so much. He was the umpire for probably 2 years, and that's who you see in the original picture of the team. Or Mike Harsh, who was the village manager at that time. And Mike went on, if you probably later, when a lot of you guys would have known him, he was in charge of the collections facility for a long time. So that's who our umpires were. And that was because we could always have somebody who could, explain the game pretty well to them. And that's what our umpires would do, is help explain the game. So it would leave me to be able to try to assign my players. Now, I have to explain to you one quick thing. I didn't play baseball. I had to, before I could research the Muffins, I had to research how to play baseball because I was a basketball player in high school. So the idea of how to play baseball, but they made me the manager of the team, and I got to assign all these guys, including the director of the society, where he was going to go play. So a lot of power for a 24-year-old. But it was fun. The guys who continued to play, we had the site manager then, Steve Henthorne, and I think Steve is the only one who still works for the society, who was a muffin that's still here, so of the original muffins. So there's at least one of us that's still working at the society. Let's see if there's anything else. Oh, some of the memories of places. I did get to travel. I did the first time you guys went to the Cincinnati Reds game. And if you guys haven't heard the story of that, it's probably the most hilarious thing you've ever seen. We played when Pete Rose was managing the team. So we get to the stadium and we're told we come in on a bus. And I'm at this point over at Pickwa, but they said, we want you to come on and be there. So I'm in my little dress. Well, I'm not in a dress yet. They said, we'll put you in the dressing room. We'll give you locker rooms. And I'm like, I'm going to be in the guys' locker room? And they're just like, no, you have your own locker room. So I had my own single locker room, but then I had to go find the guys. So they thought they were big stuff too, with their own locker room. They were just like, oh. So then they go out, and all we've been told is we're playing a local radio station. And we get out in the field and we start meeting the players who we're going to be playing against. We're playing against Pete Rose's brother. He's on the local radio station. Let's just say we were set up. The only advantage again is they didn't understand the rules. The other thing is too that they said to me, you're going to do the color commentary. We're going to put you on a mic at home base and you get to say play by play what's happening. Well, again, I'm not a baseball player and doing color commentary was not my strength, but I persevered with Pete Rose standing behind me saying, what are they doing out there? It was an interesting game. Our guys played 3 innings, and we survived, but just barely. And I will tell you, when we went home, we stayed for the game, but when we went home, I had a lot of very sore muffins at that time. Some of the other things we did when we were, besides, we went to Zor. When we played at Slate Run Farm, if you've never played at Slate Run Farm, they put us in the cow pasture. Oh. We were dodging meadow muffins, as they called them, all over the place. It was not a pretty game. Also, we had our own song. We had the muffin song, which you've seen. We had the original sports banquet the first year. We went to Max and Irma's. And at that point, Max and Irma's had phones where you could call other tables. Again, I'm the only woman there, and there's a bunch of guys, and there's quite a few single muffins at that point. They're calling people at other tables. There was a big chalkboard in the men's restroom. They were writing on the bulletin board, or the chalkboard, things like, if you want to have a good time, call Amos Loveday at. And they put his work number in. It was like watching over a bunch of little kids. So it's always been kind of a fun group of guys, even though they're historians. There's several things I brought. I know some of the things you guys have seen, but I brought their first certificates. I had to make all their certificates. They're all hand lettered. Everybody got a little certificate telling, you know, how the season went. That's from the second year. They won 10 games, lost 6 or 8, something like that. We called them the Mighty Muffins at that point. And they not only got the certificate, but there were little clothespins. And I did find that Chuck Eichensterger still has his. I painted little clothespins to look like everyone in the Muffins. So each of them had their own individual muffin clothespin. So, anybody have any questions? It's kind of who you guys started, and that's why, you know, you're the muffins, and it's kind of tongue-in-cheek here, so, yes.
I still have some of when I started, the original press kits things that we would give at tally keepers, which not just have the original pictures, but have the Sports Illustrated part in there and all kinds of beginning history things. I still have those.
And I have, it's great that you guys have, I think, the only copy of the original picture, and I'm hoping I can find that. I'll get you guys a scan of it as soon as I find it.
Could you lend those to us?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, they are.
Well, what we have up here, I have the Sports Illustrated copy. I have one from Americana, and I have one from Marathon. Marathon, I think, sponsored you guys for 3 years. They did the scoreboard, and the scoreboard came the first year. And they paid for all your uniforms, you know, so they underwrote the uniforms and all that. And, you know, we would agree to be promotional pieces for them. So a couple of us went up to Marathon in Findlay and walked the halls and described who we were. And that was a hilarious thing, too. Oh, we also, a couple of us muffins were drawers for the state lottery.
Oh, geez, really?
They took us up in costume and we had to draw, you know, there's special winners, you know, you can send your ticket in and you can be drawn from, you know, those tickets to be a special winner. The process, they took a couple of us in there and we were asked to draw that. There's 3 rooms, probably the size of this warehouse with all those tickets. And there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bags of these tickets. So you first draw a number that draws the number of the bag, and then you draw the ticket. And the muffins we're walking around downtown Cleveland in our outfits, which, let's just say, we were kind of looked at really a lot. So, and there's pictures of the original muffin meadow there. So, and I do thank you. One of the things you guys gave me the Chadwick Award in 2000, so I really appreciate that along with it. But I have to laugh because when people ask me, you know, through what I did at the Historical Society, you guys are one of the things I say first. You know, I got a lot of nice awards, but being the first muffin manager was part of my, you know, great times. So I really thank you. Yeah.
Since there's always been a question about the first vintage baseball team, when you were doing your research, did you find other groups?
There was nobody else that we knew of playing, you know, so I know they've talked about, is it Beth Page Village?
Yeah.
At that point, I didn't hear of anybody, you know, and nobody at Cooperstown told Amos that anybody else was playing. You know, you would kind of think, to describe Amos and my roles in this, Amos was the idea person and I was the implementer. So, you know, the idea was, you know, whatever he came up with, I was going to make sure it got done. And the other plus for me, what the muffins did for me is, you were my first chance to be able to come up with creating a program and doing all the detail work. And I really learned a lot from doing that. So, but I never heard of any other team playing at that point. So that's what, I can't even answer that for you.
Question. Because we heard from them that they were the first.
Yeah, what year did they say? Because I remember we were talking about that, Jim, weren't we?
80?
They say 80.
1980.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was 81 for us but you know, let's just say nobody said that they were playing at that point, so.
I heard people say that there were demonstrations, but not necessarily games and a full schedule like you had put together.
We had a full schedule the first year. And the first team we played was the center and stuff, and we had uniforms, that, you know, as soon as we started.
How many games a week, or how many games did you guys play that first year?
We played 6 the first year, and we played pretty much only during the summer months. Once Labor Day came, we really didn't play anything after that. It just was getting into, the guys, especially the crafts people, had a lot of things to get ready for Christmas season, because we did a full-out Christmas season at that point. So we pretty much only played until the end of August. So that explains that.
Vicki, we appreciate this very much.
Oh,
Thank
no
you very
problem.
much.
We're going to take about a 5-minute break to welcome the